While congregations should be vigilant at all times, they should never resort to deadly force to stop a violent intruder.
It's justifiable for congregations to resort to deadly force to stop a violent intruder.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Thank you, Mark, and I too would like to welcome you to today's program. It's one right out of the headlines if you listen to the opening remarks. But before we get into our discussion, I'd like for you to meet all of our panelists. Let's have each one tell who they are and a little bit about what they do. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right.
My name is Mel Robeck. I'm Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I am also an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am an Episcopal priest, and I'm canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington, D.C.
Hi, I'm Tom Plumbley. I'm the Senior Minister at First Christian Church in downtown Fort Worth, Texas. We're a part of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ.
I'm Andrea Luxton. I'm president of Andrews University, which is in Berrien Springs, Michigan. We are affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I'm the senior rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
Hi, I'm Tony Mathews, and I'm the senior pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
Well, my thanks to each one of you for being here today. As you can see, we have a great panel assembled for this discussion. Let's get right to our subject. The Lord's Supper, communion service, or the Eucharist is a time in which Christian congregations are asked to examine their hearts, to remember what Jesus did in offering Himself up as our sacrifice, and proclaim His death until His return. It is also a time when forgiveness is offered and received. In the midst of a recent communion service, a gunman entered a church in White Settlement, Texas, pulled out a shotgun, and opened fire. He killed one parishioner and injured another. Within 6 seconds, the gunman was dead, shot by two gun-toting members of the church's security team. The local chief of police and governor called their action heroic. In light of the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," and Jesus' teaching, "Do not resist an evil person, but turn the other cheek," and also love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, we would like our panelists to reflect on the meaning of such scripture texts as well as the following questions. My first question to the panelists today is this: is it a responsible Christian act for churches to allow deadly weapons into the sanctuary during worship services? Another question: in light of Jesus' teaching, can it ever be justified for a church to engage a security team with instructions to shoot with the possibility that someone might be killed? And then finally, how do the actions of the security team fit in light of Jesus' willingness to give up His life on behalf of others? That's our subject for today and the questions I'm asking our panelists to consider. Let's get back to those who helped to begin the program. For that, we go back to Dr. Robeck, and then we'll go over to Dr. Mathews in just a moment. But more thoughts on your opening statement, if you would, please, Dr. Robeck.
Yeah, I think maybe if some of our viewers have watched this program for several years, they will know that I'm very much opposed to violence of any kind. And I'm opposed to guns. And I think that's an important place for me to start. I think that when I read the New Testament in particular, when I follow the teachings of Jesus, I find it very, very difficult to understand why anyone would kill another person. I just find that absolutely impossible to imagine. I don't think that's the way Jesus would function or react or respond. In fact, I would say that when He was attacked, He allowed that to take place on his life. He gave his life. It wasn't simply taken from him. When I think about churches, and we have thought about this in our own congregation over the years, I mean, you have the question of terrorism, you have the question of armed robberies, where in Southern California we had 2 or 3 churches that were robbed at gunpoint when people came in there to take the offering away. You know, we have tried to train our elders and tried to train certain people in the church to be ready and certain actions to be taken, but none of them come close to being able to take a gun out and shoot somebody to kill, which is precisely what I understand took place in this particular church in Texas. I would also add that in the middle of a communion service, when the message of communion is about forgiveness, the message of communion is about grace, the message of communion is about remembering what Christ has done for us, and we are consistently told to follow his example, it's hard for me to imagine that a church would say, yes, we need a security force, yes, they need to be armed, and yes, they need to shoot to kill whenever somebody comes in and does something violent like this. It seems to me that in trying to follow through the news items as I did on this particular show, there might have been places where interventions could have taken place earlier. Clearly, the man who claimed to be, or the man who was celebrated as a hero said, I saw him come in, I had my eye on him, I started walking almost immediately. It seems to me that had he been a little faster, the shots might not have rung out in the first place. But I cannot imagine shooting a person in the middle of a church service, especially at the high point of the service or the mass or whatever, when the absolute opposite of the message that is being done in the place is in a sense, essentially ignored. And I furthermore cannot understand why anybody, even secular people, would argue that this makes a person a hero. He may have saved some lives, but he killed somebody as well. There is such a thing as self-defense. Was he in a position where he was defending himself? I don't think so. He might have been defending some others. But could there not have been another way to do that? I think we need to look for all options.
All right, thank you very much. Now, Dr. Mathews, you have a different point of view on the subject, I take it. More thoughts on
I do.
On your
and for our
statement.
viewers, this is an example of 2 friends
Yes.
who totally disagree on the topic.
Well, you have the right to be wrong.
Here we go.
Here we go. Okay. I totally disagree with Mel's comments. I do think, in fact, the person who stopped the murderer is a hero. And my view is when you're in church, that is a very vulnerable place. Innocent people are there. You have parents with their children. We have the right, the biblical right to protect our children. You have husbands in there with their wives. And for someone to come in with a shotgun and to open fire and I believe both of those individuals died, I believe. I think having a security team ready to respond to stop the person shooting is a very good thing. And my understanding of the passage, do not resist a person but turn the other cheek, that word resist, my understanding, is a legal term, and this is a term in context where Christ was telling folks not to take people to court. And I think 70 to 95% of people in the U.S. or in the world actually are right-handed, and this is the picture of someone backhanding you, slapping you, backhanding you, and insulting you, and do not return insult for insult. That's my understanding of this. But when someone has a gun in a church, and my question to everyone who thinks that this person was wrong, how many people had to die, or would you allow to be shot before stopping this individual? How many people, if you have 200 or 300 folks in that congregation and he's clearly shooting people, how many more people have to die, get shot, before we say, okay, somebody with a gun really needs to take him out? And I'm glad this person was taken out. We have a security team at our church, and if someone comes in to our church with a gun and they shoot, our security team is going to take them out. Now, lastly, all last week and the week before last, I was trying to contact this church to speak with someone there. And on my way to the studio this morning, in fact, when I got into the studio, I said, let me try to contact this church one more time. And I had a chance to speak to the pastor who answered the phone this morning. And I told him we was going to have a show on this. And what did he think? He said he is extremely happy, grateful that this security person stopped this murderer. And I'll have more to say later on.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Now, Rabbi Levin, unfortunately, Jewish congregations and synagogues particularly have had trouble with this issue. What is your position on this matter of self-defense or protective defensive measures in synagogues?
So I'll speak about this in two different lights. First, in Jewish law, the obligation is clear. And that obligation is that human life is of infinite value. And if someone is coming after you to kill you, in Hebrew that's called a rodef, a pursuer, you are obligated to kill the pursuer to save life. Jewish law is very clear that you must do everything you can to protect human life, and that when someone comes to you as a pursuer or a marauder, they have forfeited their own right to life. But then you have to ask yourself, what's the best way to do that? And I think that may be where there is some difference of opinion. In our congregation, as in many after the anti-Semitic attacks in Pittsburgh, at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Poway, California, and New Jersey, many synagogues have undertaken very significant security reviews with security professionals and those who are in the field. And almost all those that we have consulted with have told us that amateur security teams tend not to be effective, and that you have to be very careful of those who are amateurs. They said, even though in the movies it looks really easy, when someone comes upon you and there is surprise and trying to hit a moving target is almost impossible, the likelihood of an amateur hurting an innocent bystander is very high. The likelihood that they will be able to take out the marauder is actually low. And that when law enforcement comes to an active shooter situation, anybody they see with a gun, they're going to assume is the perpetrator, and they're going to take that person out. And so we've been told that unless that person is trained law enforcement and they've had tactical weapons training, that no one should be allowed to bear a weapon inside a house of worship. It's for the safety of all those inside that you should engage professional security. And in our congregation, we have professional armed security to protect those who come to worship.
All right, thank you very much. And Dr. Luxton, your take on the subject, please.
This one's been a really hard one for me. I come from a culture, grew up in England, where, as you know, the police do not even have guns. It's just not the culture. And so to me, I instinctively react to guns as a defense mechanism, or of course in an attack. But at the same time, I feel there is a responsibility to protect the innocent, and that as a leader in any environment, that is a responsibility. And to stand by and not protect and see multiple people potentially killed, I think is wrong. So what do you do? I suppose I would go to the route of saying I think everything should be done to find other means of protection before one goes to the route of guns as a protection. I think that's the way I would say it. But if there's nothing else, if that is the only means of protecting, I very, very reluctantly think that may be the way we have to go.
Okay, thank you very much. Reverend Plumbley, your thoughts, please.
Thank you. As pastor of a congregation that is only about 4 or 5 miles from the one being discussed here, White Settlement is just a suburb of Fort Worth, and not even an outlying suburb of Fort Worth. We have been touched by that killing and that response as much as any other. But as I said to Rabbi Levin before we began the program, where in this country have we not been close to this sort of thing? I think I want to follow up on Dr. Luxton's suggestion that we need fewer guns and fewer people with access to guns. I find, philosophically, I am far more in Dr. Robeck's camp of not seeing reason to do violence or to take a life in much of any situation. However, my congregation has taken significant security steps and has enhanced those since this shooting, which I believe was the first Sunday of 2020. We lock doors that formerly were not locked. We have an armed officer. We've done that for years. We have cameras at various places around the building and outside the building. We have two-way radios that various people have access to. All those things are appropriate things. And we have a security team. And the security team is responsible for response to illness. They're responsible for leading the congregation if there were a bomb threat, how do we evacuate, and that sort of thing. They're responsible for unwanted visitors. We have our doors open to everybody, but occasionally there's somebody who's walking through a restraining order when they come in, or something like that, and we need to be able to ask them to leave. And our security team is armed. And the biggest problem I have with it is a personal problem, and that is that we haven't discussed it. This happened simply as a group of people in the congregation decided this was something that the congregation needed to do, and the congregation's leadership has yet to discuss it. I think that is critical. The West Freeway Church of Christ, where the shooting took place, and my church both come out of a tradition that say we don't do things unless we can find precedent for them in Scripture. I'm not sure they or we can find precedent in Scripture for a team that would kill somebody in the middle of worship.
All right.
That said, we have one, and I'm not sure I'm absolutely against it.
All right, thank you very much then. Canon Peterson, your thoughts, please.
First off, I want to speak about Scripture, and then I want to share an experience I just had last Sunday, actually. The Scripture, or Jesus, I should say, has nothing to say about guns and gun violence. That has to be put on the table. Jesus has nothing to say about guns or gun violence. If one wanted to proof text Jesus' position on guns, they can't, because the first gun was made in China in the 10th century. Cannons first appeared in Italy in 1320, and by the 16th century, European firearms had become more advanced than their counterparts in the East. Mm-hmm. So there's no proof text in the Scripture in relationship to Jesus and guns. That being said, while guns and gun violence may not be addressed in the Scripture, but certainly human dignity is, and the sanctity of life and the central core principles. And I would certainly say here that if we're going on sides today, I stand with Mel. What I would want to say is that I think there is an option other than simply having some professional fire shooters there to kill someone in your parish. Last Sunday, I was in New York, in lower Manhattan, and I had to walk through a security booth, just like you have at the airport. And every single person had to walk through it. And also there was a x-ray machine for our handbags and things like that. And it seems to me if it becomes a difference between a person being shot in church by paid gun professional police, or going through a security check with an x-ray machine to check your luggage or your hand luggage, there's no question that I would not recommend. And I suspect in the long run, a lot cheaper than other alternatives that could possibly be suggested.
Interesting. Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for this segment. Yes, it went very quickly. Important subject, no doubt about that. And thank you for listening through it. We're going to come back in just a few moments for each one's summary. But until then, this is an important message I'd like for you to hear.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Thank you, Mark, and welcome back. So glad that you've joined us for today's program. We're going to have our summaries in just a moment, but before then, I would also encourage you to go to the website. There you can send us an email about programs that you have watched, comments you'd like to make about them, and you can also make suggestions for topics that you'd like to hear discussed at this panel. So let's go to our summaries now. Let's begin with Dr. Robeck. You're first.
As the rabbi pointed out, life is of infinite value, not only to God, I think, but it should be to human beings as well. Anytime we take a life, we have really crossed a huge gap in human relations, if you would. But not only that, I sometimes think, or often think, that we have crossed a huge gap between us and God. That's why I'm opposed to war, the bearing of arms, and so forth. I remember a time going to the Apostolic Palace in Rome to meet with John Paul II, along with a group of about 45 bishops. And all of us had to go through metal detectors and be wanded and so forth. So there's nothing new to that idea. It might be possible for churches to do that. It's also possible that churches could have people in place that are fast, quick, and trained in other kinds of ways of handling violent people. But from our perspective as Christians, Christ died for the people that are most troubled, and surely this person was.
All right, thank you very much. Reverend Plumbley.
Thank you. There are dangers in being a part of the society that we live in. There are dangers in being gathered together in any place. But as we've seen, many in sacred places. Let me ask those of you who are wanting to have additional guns, do the additional guns lessen those dangers, or do they simply increase them? Talk to us about friendly fire. Talk to us about accidental discharge. Talk to us about what happens when the police arrive and see all these other people with guns. Talk to us about how you screen team members and when, although Bob has been somebody that everybody knows is just a fine guy, when is Bob no longer qualified to be on the team because he's either losing his vision or because he's become so easily angered that he might be actually one of these perpetrators.
Thank you. We're up against the clock here.
Thank you. These are questions that I think any house of worship needs to answer before they arm themselves.
All right, thank you very much. Rabbi Levin.
Very briefly, I think that there may be a difference in the way that Jewish tradition and others look at this. In Jewish tradition, human life is of infinite value, and there is an obligation to protect human life from those who would damage it. And the circumstances around these incidents are truly tragic, that anyone has to lose their life. But what's tragic is that someone brought violence into a house of worship. I think perhaps one of the ways that you can avoid bloodshed is to create hardened targets. One of the things that we know from the attack in Pittsburgh was that that attacker came to Pittsburgh because it was a ripe target.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Mathews, we're on the clock.
Yes, real quickly, Jesus didn't say anything about guns because guns were not part of the culture, but he had a lot to say about swords and being as wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And some may have a problem with Jesus whipping people out of the temple when they turned the house of God into something that it should not have been. So when someone brings a gun into the house of God and someone else stops him or her, I think it's just appropriate, and I'm glad it happened.
Thank you. Dr. Luxton.
In an ideal world, we would be able to keep both values equally, the value to protect the innocent and the value not to kill. And I think when we can't hold those values, both of those values, we have to move very, very, very cautiously and thoughtfully.
All right, thank you very much. Canon Peterson.
I would just like to raise one question. The question about gun rights isn't whether or not someone can own a gun. The question is a right to have gun violence. The issue is not owning a gun, but gun violence.
All right, thank you very much. This time went by very quickly. Thank you very much for being here today and for your tuning in to watch this program. We hope to see you again real soon. Before that comes, though, you can go to the website and look at some of the other programs that we've talked about before. And then also make sure you look in on the American Religious Town Hall to see that wonderful organization and the services they provide to the communities in which they reside. But for now, the charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics and Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. So again, thank you so much for tuning in today. We're going to come back again next week, or you can tune in on whatever means you've tuned into the program. But it's a wonderful time to get together around the table like this to discuss these important matters. And so on the same channel at the same time, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned for now. We'll see you again soon, and may the God of all of us bless all of you.